Let me talk briefly about the Maryland Community College Promise Scholarship Program, because again, that is the reason we did not admit a cohort through the Wicomico program here in fall 2019. This program is a statewide Promise program for the state of Maryland, and $15 million was allocated by the legislature for this program. The program was passed in 2017. There were amendments made to the program during the legislative session in 2018. It has been a rough beginning, and there have been articles in the press, Washington Post, etc., about the implementation of this program and how it has started out statewide. The Maryland Higher Education Commission is responsible for implementation of the program. It's been very difficult for us as one of the 16 community colleges in the implementation. There's been quite a bit of inconsistent communication. There's been a changing of the process. We didn't really even know what the process is in terms of getting students enrolled were going to be until we were pretty far into the fall of 2018. And if you know anything about college students, or you had a son or daughter go to college recently, you know that they're really making decisions about college the fall before they're going to enroll in college. So it had an impact on us, certainly in terms of bringing students into that program locally. We kept getting rosters that were wrong. We made 514 manual adjustments to rosters in the course of a few months. And so the Maryland Higher Education Commission, the community colleges, our senators and delegates and others are working on how we do this better in the coming years. But we do believe in the program statewide. We believe it will have an impact on Maryland and have an impact on making sure that students can afford and access college. But we still, even at this late hour as school has started for us here over the last few weeks, we still don't even know how many students we will have that will benefit from the program in the end. At last count, we had about 25 students who had completed all the requirements for the Promise program this year. But again, we know that there will probably be more as those students finalize paperwork and finalize processing with the Higher Education Commission. So I think our hope of all of us that are working on this is that now we have an idea of what the regulations look like and how this is going to roll out, that we'll have a better opportunity to enroll more students as we get into for the 2020 fall 2020 cycle. Of course, this program with MHEC, remember, this statewide program, this takes care of or works on taking care of the needs of those students who are just graduating from high school or those students that have graduated from high school 2 years ago. So for example, the students who are coming into the fall 19 cohort could have graduated here in 2019, or they could have graduated from high school in 2018.
And just for the record, this is not the dual enrollment program.
This is not the dual enrollment program, that's right. That's a separate program that's been very successful. That is funded through other means, and we have over 500 students at Warwick that are doing dual enrolled programs. Some of them who are coming into who came into the WISE program or who have come into the Maryland Community College Promise Scholarship Program, already having completed substantial numbers of credits. But you're right, they are different programs. I think it's important to remember as we look to the future of what the Wicomico funding might be used for, that both the Wicomico program as put together previously as well as the Promise program are really focused on students coming out of high school. And they're focused on students going full-time in credit, degree, and certificate programs. And so as we look forward, we know that there are needs of folks that can obtain a college education and get into the workforce that are not being met. Certainly students that are going part-time, that can't afford to do full-time, even when tuition and fees are paid for, they still have obligations and responsibilities that have them work 15 to 20 hours per week. And so we have that group of students who certainly have a need in terms of funding. We have students certainly that are older than those coming out of high school that maybe didn't go to college when they came out of high school. Maybe they need to retrain in some way for new jobs in our community or future jobs in our community. And so those students who are older, mid-20s, 30s, et cetera, this funding, none of the funding that we're talking about at the moment applies to them.
And I've brought that up before because I try to attend all the graduations, and you see people in their 40s walking the stage they graduated, and some of them probably could have benefited from this program.
Exactly. So we have, as we look to the future, Dr. Hoy has had a conversation with the county executive. Of course, the county executive was the one that initially brought this program forward. But we're looking at how we can maybe adjust the program to meet those workforce development needs of those students in our non-credit programs, for example, as well as credit programs that may be needed for workforce readiness. As you know, we're preparing to build an applied technology center that will have many of these needed workforce programs for our community in it. How can we fund students who may not be coming out of high school? They may have a way to be taken care of through the Promise program. There are other students and other people in our community that need that leg up with community college education. And of course, our non-credit programs are those programs that don't end in a degree or a formal certificate. They end up in some sort of licensure or certification. So welding, CNA, phlebotomy, etc. There's a great need there, and those are short-term programs where students can end up in the workforce very quickly. There's a need that can be funded for those students as we look to the future. So I think where we're at is we would ask the council's patience as Dr. Hoy and myself put pen to paper and really try to come up with what the future of the program might look like, and then come back to you for further conversation at a later date.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
When the program was first brought out, it was supposed to, be helping the employers of Wicomico County hire people. And you said a while ago that how many people had gone through the program completely and graduated or moved on to another college?
In terms of funding from the WISE program, 33.
33. Is there any tracking mechanism to find out how many of the ones that graduated have stayed in Wicomico County and worked?
We're following up with them. Again, the first graduates of the program are really
I asked this question last year too.
Yeah, they're just coming out. I mean, what's happening is, of course, many of the students are going on to a four-year university, and most of those, frankly, are at SU, and would go to work at that point. So we're tracking those that we have coming out, but it's very few, of course, in terms of actual graduates at this point. As we go through and we have those students completing their third and fourth years of a bachelor's education, we're going to need to find out where they're working and what they're doing.
So we don't have any working so far?
We don't have any working so far that I'm aware of, no.
And this was put in 16?
This was put in 16. Remember, it's 2 to 2.5 years to complete their education, so they are just coming out as graduates, or again, many of them are transferring. So, and again, we're only looking, and those numbers we're talking about are only those students that are funded by the program. Of course, the program has had an impact on bringing people to higher education that wouldn't have otherwise thought about it, because again, we're talking about taking care of the students in terms of free scholarship monies. Many of them could have done that anyway through the Pell program and other means, but they didn't think about it, they didn't know about it. This program that you approved has helped students come to the college that otherwise wouldn't have, because again, when you talk about FAFSA and you talk about all the things you have to do in terms of getting ready for college, it can be a barrier to students. It can be very confusing and can end up in them not pursuing it. So it's not only the ones you've funded, but it's the ones that have come through outside of the program that have been funded through other means.
What are the differences between the state program and Wicomico's program as far as qualifications getting in? I understand the state set their bar a little higher than we did.
Yeah, there's a couple differences in the two programs.
As far as qualifications.
Sure. The Promise program statewide has a 2.3 grade point average in terms of an entry GPA.
We had a 2.0, didn't we?
The WISE program didn't have any entrance GPA, had a 2.0 continuing GPA in terms of continuing in the program. The continuing GPA in the WISE program, in the Promise program, is 2.5. They also set their income limits different in terms of application. So the WISE program had the $75,000 income threshold. The state program has $100,000 for a single parent household, $150,000 for a two-parent household. And as we've talked about many times before, with the $75,000 income threshold, most of those students ended up being taken care of by the federal Pell Grant program. That's why we've had very few students funded by the program, because they were taken care of by other means, which is great. They came to college, they were able to take advantage of resources that were there. But those are the differences, major differences in the application portions of the program.
I'd hope when you, I know you're talking about doing something workforce development, so this money can be used, like Larry said, a little, putting people back to work, retraining.
Right.
When that is discussed, it would be nice to make sure that the folks did have some skin in the game. It wasn't a complete wash and completely free to them, but that it was an assistance program more so than. I think that would be. I think the citizens would appreciate that more.
Okay.
Instead of.
I guess that was my question that I had. If they don't complete these, or if they fail every course, just not showing up, do they have to repay that?
The mechanism is built in. Well, certainly if they didn't show up at the beginning, they would be taken out. We have a date 20% in, where if you don't show up to classes, you are taken out of classes at that point, and there's no charge in that case to the county. Their classes are dropped at that point. But if they stay in class past that 20% marker, then yes. If they did not reach the threshold in the Wicomico program of completing 12 credits and having a 2.0 GPA, then they could not receive funding the next semester. So they don't have carte blanche. They have that semester, and they have each semester where they have to meet that threshold. And it's actually the same in the Maryland Promise program, just a different GPA. They have to reach 2.5, but again, they have to continue with the 12 credits. As we look at the program and evaluating it, certainly the 12 credits is a difficult piece that we need to look at statewide as well as locally. 74% of our students at Warwick are part-time. So these students who are being asked to take 12 credits per semester are actually very much in the minority of the students that we have at the college. And community colleges generally take care of and are there for those folks that are working toward either a credit or non-credit credential or non-credit licensure or certification, and they're doing so often on their own time, in between working, in between taking care of families, etc. And so I think as we develop these programs to assist students with college education, we kind of have to be mindful that we have to be realistic about which students and who is attending community colleges. It's different than if you go to SU or any other of our fine four-year institutions. I mean, they're in residence. they're there, they're living there, they're taking full loads of classes. That is a different student than we often have with us.
Right, it'd be nice to build in some type of provisional status for some of these students, whether they're working full-time or not. Some people may struggle taking more than 2 classes.
Sometimes that's what I think has always been a concern over the last couple of years with the program. It's the best of intentions to initiate this program. I don't know whether we're hitting the mark as much as we thought we would, and you know our concerns as a county level is the most efficient use of our funds. I believe in one of the years there's sort of a 41% follow-through success rate, which I think is very low. If I'm reading correctly here on the 2019 progress, from the 17 students originally, only 4 have elected to continue.
We have 4 continuing full-time, yes.
Right, and I'm really concerned about that. You're starting out with 17.
Sure.
You're only getting a number of 4. It's no reflection on Warwick or your program whatsoever, but I think something seems to be amiss where the taxpayers' dollars that are being spent, somehow or another, it's not an effective use of taxpayers' funding if we're only getting 4 out of 17. And I don't know, outside of your comment that your comment in this document, that they were faced with the challenges of having to work and go to school, and part of what you just said a minute ago. So I'm trying to see how we can to make this work so that the cost per student, cost per credit isn't tenfold of what it is for the average student.
A couple comments, and certainly share your concerns about retention and completion, and that's what we spend the majority of our time discussing and working through at the college, and I think all community colleges. That's kind of the biggest challenge for us. Again, because you're talking about a different type of student often who's not living in residence, whose full life is not pursuing education. There's a lot of other factors at play. And we're spending, just so you know, a lot of time and energy on the whole population of our students in terms of how we can better retain them and get them to graduation or transfer. Our retention rates generally are in the 50% marks for our entire student population, and it's not a failure of the college, it's not a failure of the instructors. Again, these students have many challenges in their lives as they're working through their education that maybe an 18-year-old at College Park or SU or somewhere else doesn't, because they're living in residence. They have that full support. But it certainly, take your point. I think what we'll see as the years goes on with these numbers is that you'll see some of these students will come back to us. That's often the case with Warwick Community College students who they don't succeed initially. They come back a semester or 2 later. They continue their education because they're comfortable with it. So I do understand you're trying to be as efficient as possible with the dollars, and we need to work with you to look at the program going forward and how we can best do that. But I do think you can be assured that I think there's long-term effects here that you have put in motion that will help even more students that are listed here as fulfilling the exact requirements of these programs. You have students who are continuing at lesser credits. You have students that will come back, and it's all about impressing upon students in high school and in the community the value and the importance of a college education for our citizens here and for developing a workforce. But
I think sometimes it's going to come down to is the best investment in postgraduate, or it might be workforce development. I think we really need to seriously evaluate that.
Well, I think that's what you're telling us. You're looking into that. I mean, it seems like our target audience, that we initially set out with was mainly that full-time student, but now with the Maryland Promise program, it seems like that non-traditional student and that workforce development student is probably where those greater needs are, and probably where our dollars can be more efficiently spent.
Yeah, right now, and of course, Promise has been approved. It has now had an allocation of $15 million. We believe statewide this year that they'll probably spend about $4 million. So they're not spending the entire allocation. We think as the program gets moving, it will. As we look forward, will there be a time when Promise won't cover the needs and we'll have students who want to access that program that might need the help locally, and there are a number of these county-supported and community-supported programs now across the state. So we do have to keep that in mind going forward. I think as was stated earlier, you know, depending on the state, you just, you know, it is what it is for the moment. But certainly in this day and time today, the Maryland Promise program is meeting a need of those students who are coming out of high school and have been out of high school for a year. You know, we think, again, that there are other needs that need to be met, particularly looking at our workforce and those students who maybe have been out of high school for a few more years. There's a need there. There's a need for the part-time. There's a need for students who want to get that retraining. So there's a lot of needs that we have to meet in the future. So I hope the council will consider that, certainly as we go forward, that Promise just doesn't solve all our issues in terms of funding. There's a great number of needs that we need to meet to build our workforce.
Just to let you know, Bill, that was discussed when this program came along, but it was dismissed as something that they thought they needed. So we did talk about that at the time, workforce funding. Does the Promise program do any workforce funding at all?
The Promise does do workforce, but again, it's only for that right out of high school group.
Okay.
And so they do, that was a change in the past legislative session, that it added that students could access that funding for a licensure or certification of courses that are taught in a sequence. So if you do one session of welding and then you come back and do another session of welding 2, you know, it would take care of that. But it does not take care of any students who are not out of that high school range, other than those who just completed a GED. That's the only other circumstance. So again, I think as we look at the age of the students and where they're at in their life, we really need to look at, because there's not, as you may know, we have federal Pell Grants and those type of things for the credit population, but for the non-credit population, again, the welding, the CNA, et cetera, we do not have that federal Pell money. There's some GI Bill for our veterans that can access certain programs, but for the most part, the resources are on the credit side of the institution in terms of scholarships and financial support.
We will be anxious to see what your recommendations might be in the near future.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
all.
Thank you.
Yep.
One question, of the 15 million the state allocated, you said only 4 million was spent?
4 million statewide, correct.
Why was that?
Again, because of the rollout and the way it was very difficult for students to access the program.
So they had the same struggles.
Yeah, everybody, yeah, all the community colleges had the same struggles we did. And again, that number is shifting because, again, we're still awarding students because of the backlog and the way the program has been implemented. So we won't know a true number here for several months.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
again. The next item on the agenda, and following this, we'll go to, we're going to break for lunch, but the cable franchise agreement with Mediacom. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Roscoe Leslie, attorney for Wicomico County.
Christopher Lore, Government Relations Manager for Mediacom.
Okay.
Basically, Mediacom has a cable franchise with the county. It's a relatively small franchise. My understanding, it's about 200 households, could be expanded up to 700. We had an agreement dating back 2004 with Mediacom. It expired earlier this year, around April. Right around then, Mr. Lord and I were tasked with coming up with a new agreement because the council had recently passed a pretty comprehensive agreement with Comcast back about 3 years ago. We decided to use that as our model just for efficiency and consistency purposes. So basically everybody in the county is working under the same agreement. So we used that, pretty much swapped the names. We had to make a few changes, most particularly with regard to PAC 14. There's some provisions in the Comcast agreement that Comcast actually has a little more hands-on participation or hands-on role in PAC 14, where Mediacom simply will be contributing towards it financially and carrying it on their network versus having to provide studio and other lines and things like that. So that's the main change from the Comcast agreement. I did provide a summary of the changes from the old Mediacom agreement to you. Again, basically, the Mediacom agreement was about 10 pages long. This agreement is about 30 or 40 pages long. We expressly put in the franchise fee of 5%, which is set by the FCC, sets it. We put that in. It's not in the old agreement, but my understanding was they've been paying it anyway. So we're just formalizing this in that, and then we're formalizing the support for the PEG fee, which under the old agreement, Mediacom had made a one-time payment versus in this one, it'll be a monthly per subscriber fee of 80 cents per person, so that everybody in the county is getting the benefit of PAC 14 and contributing to PAC 14. Otherwise, basically, it's just a more detailed agreement, and basically a lot of it is really incorporating what's in the ordinance, the county ordinance anyway. The county has pretty detailed cable franchise ordinance, and the agreements basically just dump a lot of that in there. So that's pretty much it.
Any questions?
How are you going to expand to 700 from 200?
We currently can serve 700 right now. We have active 250 customers. So we can serve the 700.
Pardon me?
We can serve 700 homes right now. We
Yeah.
have an active customer base of 250.
Yeah, are you going to expand to 700?
No, we can.
You
If
can?
the customers choose to subscribe to us,
Uh-huh.
we can, up to 700 customers.
Without extending your
Without
lines?
extending anything, yes.
Okay,
That's our homes pass number that we can subscribe to. If they called in right now, we can have them service in a day or two.
okay. Sounds like you got the capacity, you need to get the job done, yeah.
Working on it.
If a customer has a problem with their internet or I guess you have internet.
Yes, sir.
And television, I know I've had issues. I've heard a lot of my constituents complain that when they call, especially after hours and weekends, they talk to somebody in the Philippines. Where are your call takers?
So we have two main call centers. One is in Gulf Breeze, Florida. The other is in Des Moines, Iowa. We have a smaller call center in Diceboro. And that's our primary call centers that take as many calls as possible whenever there is a large outage. Whenever there is a large outage or a problem with service itself that we can't meet that capacity, then we are going to have to offload those to the Philippines so customers aren't waiting an extended period of time.
Okay. I was hoping that you were very responsive to the citizens.
Yeah, we try to be. Right now, our average call times aren't very long. If I give you the base numbers, of course, that can vary depending on when you call in, right? If you have a massive outage and everyone calls at once,
Yeah.
that's going to delay some
It's
time. But
understandable.
our average time is pretty low, a couple minutes per call.
Okay.
And the revenues, sometimes I don't always understand the terminology, revenues from the provision of any cable services, that include internet as well as cable operations?
No, sir. Unfortunately, under the FCC agreements, you can't charge franchise fees for broadband service.
Not necessarily franchise fees, but I guess the gross revenue, or are you saying that what you're paying the county is franchise fee?
Right. What we're paying the county is franchise fee, which the gross revenues doesn't include anything that would be broadband or VoIP based. It'd be only the cable TV services themselves.
Okay, right.
Are your fees to the customers basically the same as Comcast?
We compete. They're very similar.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes they outprice us. Sometimes we outprice them based on the promotion. The base fees are close to the same.
Mr. Cannon, I
Yes.
have some comments if you would like to hear them.
Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I will point out that both in this agreement and in the Comcast agreement, in section 2.7, it's called competitive equity. It's essentially like a most favored nation clause in tariffs. Essentially, it says if you give an agreement to one of our competitors that is more favorable or less burdensome to them than it is to us, that you have to give us the same thing. Now, I would point out that there are a number of sections where there have been changes that arguably are less burdensome for Mediacom than for Comcast. And I can give you the section numbers if you want me to. I can discuss them, but it's basically where numbers have been changed. For example, in section 3.2, in the Comcast agreement, it talks about 20 homes per mile being the standard for extension of service. That incidentally was a big point of the negotiation with Comcast. This is going actually the other way, giving them back to what Comcast used to have. There are other adjustments like that in numbers. I can hit the sections. If you want me to discuss them, I can do that.
Well, I guess it'd be relevant to what Mr. Leslie has said, because initially you said this was pretty much the exact same contract as with Comcast, but is that not necessarily the situation?
I didn't say it was the exact same, I said there were some minor changes.
But if we sign this and agree to this, is Comcast going to come back to us for concessions?
I can't predict what Comcast will do. I think
Will they have a reason to come back to us with concessions, I guess?
I think the franchise for Mediacom is so small that I think that's the reason why some of these changes were asked for, Mr. Lord.
That's correct.
Expand.
So basically, we operate in a very small area in your community, and operating a very small area compared to a very large area creates some differences and some problems that we can't always match what Comcast is wanting. It's just the reality of operating a business in this way. We're more rural. We're not in any of the bigger towns area. So when you operate a cable system in like the larger areas, it becomes a lot easier to do certain things. Compared to rural, when you're running spans of cable just to reach 5 or 6, 7 homes, it makes basically the network a little different.
I would say this, I think some of these don't really have anything to do with whether the area is rural or urban. The one about the homes per mile possibly does. But there are others, for example, the audit look-back period has been changed. It's been shortened, which essentially is more favorable to them than it is to Comcast. And there are other things that are like that, that we could discuss now, or we could discuss later, possibly getting together with Mr. Leslie.
Well, I guess again, Mr. Leslie, what would you say? I mean, that was, the purpose for this work session is really to get a feel for what differences there might be and what the reasoning is behind that.
Mm-hmm.
So, in your initial comment that the majority of it is similar to Comcast, where was it seen that it was necessary to make these type of adjustments, and for what reason?
We had negotiation with Mediacom. They made requests. I deleted a lot of them. I think Mr. Lord will agree that I did, and we had some that they wanted to stick by, and that's how we came up with the agreement.
There's one other item, not necessarily a numerical change, but there is a change in the quarterly report. In Comcast's agreement, it provides for a fairly line item report. I'm talking about the gross revenue items. If you'll notice under the definitions,
Right.
gross revenue, there are like 20 or so different items set out. And in the Comcast agreement, there has to be a discussion of each one. This has been deleted. In the minutes from 3 years ago, before council at its work session discussing the Comcast agreement, Mr. Cohen, the attorney who the county engaged to
Right.
help them, pointed out that it's good to have the line item type report so you can see each item and find out what it is. I would think that the books of Mediacom would lend itself easily to that distinction between items of revenue. So I wouldn't imagine, Mediacom's not a small, this might be a small contract, but Mediacom is not a small entity, that would not be difficult, and I would suggest keeping it like Comcast is, regardless of whether it's 200 homes or 700 homes or something in between.
Is there a particular strategy
Yeah.
in reference to that part of the contract on behalf of the county?
Yeah, again, we had a negotiation back and forth on what we're just trying to come to an agreement. We're happy to come up with a red line and sit back down and address things.
Right.
These are issues that, I'm just hearing from Mr.
Is-
Kelly for
is-
the first time.
Yeah, I would
Okay,
need to
that's
check
fine.
with
That's fine, yeah.
accounting to see if we can do that line item. I can't tell you right now if we can or not. So I can assume that we would, but I don't want to speak out of turn and say we can definitely
Right.
do that and not be able to provide that.
Yeah,
If
I
that is
mean-
requested by the county.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to say, well, we only have one person in this department, I'd say, okay, fine, I can understand, we have to give a little leeway, but if it's an option, I don't think it would hurt to consider that.
Sure.
My concern from the beginning was the fact that I've always had an issue with, and more so with Comcast, whereas costs are passed right on to the subscriber. They don't have a problem paying more in a franchise fee, they're just going to pass it on. I didn't think enough discussion was held at the last work session that the council had in reference to Comcast. And we agreed, and it wasn't more than 2 weeks later, or not 2 weeks now, about 2 months later, when someone says to me, "Oh, I see they raised my rates again." I was like, geez, sorry about that.
Mr. Lord, we were talking beforehand on
So-
how your rates get created, basically.
Right, so our rates, basically, we create rates that are competitive with the field based upon a number of costs, such as programming costs, and as we can see, basically, from everything going on with blackouts,
Right.
programming costs are continuing to raise every single year. As those rates go up, we have to find some way to meet those costs.
Sure.
We can't continue to operate with no increase if all the costs upon us are continuing to increase. So most of those rates that we see increasing are generally based upon programming costs and increased ability to provide the network throughout our system. So it's not, we don't practically raise rates just to raise rates and create more revenue. That's rarely a situation. It's usually just we are having to pay more, we are seeing this go up. To meet those demands and to continue to carry the channels that are wanted throughout the communities, we have to pay these fees that are asked.
Yeah, I won't get into it because it doesn't really relate just to Mediacom, but I did find when I went on and Googled for like what's new at the FCC regarding cables,
Right.
is their new rule that they just announced in July and goes into effect in a couple weeks, that most likely is going to affect our franchise fee revenue under both this agreement and Comcast's. I will provide some information on that to Mr. Roser and Levin, and they can look at it, and maybe they can come up with some ballpark figure, but at least in some material I've seen, that the change could be significant in dollar terms, as I've pointed out.
Thank you, appreciate your work, Mr.
you want to
Taylor.
address-
Yeah, so for us,
Yes.
You
usually,
can speak into the microphone for us, thank you.
so for us, usually when we have some areas that request free service, and that could be offset in this new ruling, we don't have any of that in your county. Most of your office buildings are in Comcast's service area.
Okay.
So where we provide service, we're not providing any free services that we can find that I was able to make any kind of recommendation of that would offset those franchise fees. And from my understanding, the PEG fee wouldn't filter into that. I could be wrong on that. I have to verify.
The capital cost part, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the capital cost, yeah.
And as a company, we haven't decided how we're going to move forward, if we're going to implement, charging additional fees that cut into the franchise fees or not. We haven't made that decision yet, so I can't speak for a company what we're going to do.
Okay. Any questions? No? Any other comments you'd like to make?
No.
Okay, what is our process from here?
If,
Time frame?
if there's further issues that or drafting that needs to be done, I mean, Mr. Lord and I can get it done pretty quickly.
Yeah,
We've been have a very good
We just need to
relationship.
know what changes you're looking at, what changes the council, wants to focus on, what we need to do, and we can move forward to kind of working, between us and the county executive's office and whoever wants to be involved to make sure we do the best we can for the
Yeah, I
county.
appreciate it. Yeah, I think the itemization that we referenced earlier might be a good thing. and
Okay.
Depending on the time restraints of your company.
I do
yes,
believe
Mr.
this requires a public hearing, is that correct, Roscoe?
I think so.
Okay. Well, as it develops on, and I think you have a good feel for what we've discussed today, and we appreciate you being here, just let Ms. Hurley know, and we'll begin the process of the public hearing and move forward. Good? All right?
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, Mr. Cannon, I can give him, after the meeting here, when we go in, I can copy it. I've got a list of the comments if you'd like to see it.
That'd be great.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, we have a motion to adjourn to take a recess
So moved.
for half an hour. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
We'll come back sooner in a half hour? We will get a half hour?
Let's see how it works. I can't make that call for everybody.